Hey everybody, welcome to test prep time. Sorry we were a little bit late getting started today. My name's Andrew Peterson. I am the Director of Education at Method Test Prep. To follow up on what my colleague Donald McCarthy worked on yesterday, so far as the grammar was concerned, I'm also producing a grammar-based session for everyone. Back on Thursday and Friday, my colleagues Elliot and Oliver went over some math, so I figured it would be a nice move for us to spend some time going through a little bit of grammar. Moving directly into it, let's talk a little bit about grammatical errors. Sometimes with grammatical errors on the SAT and the ACT, sometimes you hear them. Sometimes you can read through the sentence directly, and it's pretty obvious that a grammatical error is being made. Like I is talking right now. I'm sure that everyone that heard me say that, you got a little shudder just listening to it. It just sounds uncomfortable. It sounds wrong. Same thing with Andrew couldn't be more clearer about these types of grammar questions. That more clearer is just repetitive. It's a repetitive use of the comparative. And again, it should sound a little bit clunky when we go through and we talk about it. These are nice grammar rules. If you're getting it on the SAT, on the ACT, this is really good to get because you feel like you know what's right and what's wrong, and hopefully you can tackle the question appropriately. But sometimes you don't hear them. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about grammatical errors that you don't hear. Here's an example of one, and this is sort of along the lines that Donald was speaking on yesterday with comma use. SAT and ACT content can be tricky. Watching test prep time every day will make a big difference. Now, when I read that out, it probably sounded pretty straightforward, right? SAT and ACT content can be tricky, definitely true. And watching test prep time every day will make a big difference, also definitely true. The issue there is that we're separating these two complete sentences, these two independent clauses, with a single comma. For those of you that know a thing or two about grammatical terms, this is called a splice, or a comma splice. Meaning that we're separating two independent clauses with just a comma, where we would need a period or a semicolon or possibly a comma plus a fanboy. We're not going to get into that, but this is a great example of a sentence that you can't really hear the error. You have to be aware that it's there, but you can't necessarily hear it. And to the point of what we're going to discuss today, this next sentence probably has an error that you can't hear. Studying hard before every test, the SAT and ACT can be mastered by any student. It seems fine, seems to make sense, right? Hey, studying hard, you can do well on any test. But here's the problem with this sentence. These two elements here in red, studying hard before every test, and the SAT and ACT, they don't mesh well, meaning there's not an appropriate link between these two things. When we do start a sentence or a clause with this element in the beginning, it's called an introductory clause. It needs to appropriately describe the subject that comes after the comma. When we make this error that we're making here, effectively we are describing the SAT and ACT as something that's studying hard before every test. Now, everyone knows that the SAT and ACT can't actually study hard. They're tests. They don't study like students do. This is a dangling modifier. Remember, the studying hard before every test is modifying our subject, SAT and ACT. And it's kind of dangling here because the thing that it's supposed to be modifying is not right next to it. So what we want to do in order to fix this error is we want to focus on the descriptive element specifically. And this is the item that we have before the comma, studying hard before every test. We want to then ask ourselves, who or what is studying hard before every test? And obviously the answer, if we take a look at everything else in the sentence, is any student, right? Students can study hard. The SAT and ACT can't study hard. Can be mastered, right? That's a verbal phrase. That can't do any studying. And once we have this question answered, we can rearrange our sentence to make sense. Studying hard before every test, any student can master the SAT and ACT. And now we can see we have this very logical link between these items, right? We have an appropriate description before the comma, and the item that that description is describing, any student, comes immediately after this comma. So that's great, right? We went through this and now we know exactly what's going on and how to fix it. But if we can't hear the error, how do we know when we're being tested on it, right? How are we going to be aware in the middle of a test that this is actually happening if we're working quickly to fit our time frames and we're going through as many questions as we possibly can? Wouldn't it be easy for something like this to kind of slip through the cracks? So let's talk about a couple ways that we can recognize something like this appropriately. So what to look for? You want to look for answer choices that look like they're all basically saying the same thing. And here's a sample of answer choices from an SAT. Lion snares the envelope with its teeth. Envelope is snared by the lion with its teeth. Teeth of the lion snare the envelope. So I know these are saying different things, but basically if you look at an answer choice like this, you're saying to yourself, well, what's the difference between these? Yeah, we're kind of moving the words around a little bit. Maybe we start with lion or envelope or teeth, but aren't we just kind of saying the same thing? We're not really making too many changes between answer choices A through D. Second thing you want to look for, an underlined portion in the passage that's immediately preceded by a comma. Let's take a look at what this means. Notice that circled comma there in red. And our underlined portion, in this case, underlined portion 44, is coming immediately after a comma, or it is preceded by this comma. This is the second thing we want to look for. Third item, an ing word in the clause before the comma. Notice over here that we have this word marking. It's the third word under number 2. I didn't put an additional screenshot from the SAT in here just because we can use the one above. But notice that far from marking the end of investigative journalism, comma. So these are the 3 things we want to look for. Again, answer choices that look like they're basically the same, an underlined portion in the passage that's preceded by a comma, and an ing word in the clause before the comma. So let's take a look at an example. This is the one we were just dealing with. Far from marking the end of investigative journalism, cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens has been facilitated by the advent of the digital age through an increase in the number of potential investigators. All right. So if we're going to tackle this question appropriately, we want to do what we did in that previous slide, right? We want to take a look at what exists before this comma. What's in that introductory clause? It says far from marking the end of investigative journalism. So now we have to ask ourselves who or what is far from marking the end of investigative journalism, right? And when we take a look at this, we can recognize immediately that it's the advent of the digital age. And we know this because in this case, the number of potential investigators has increased, right? Well, that's not far from marking the end of investigative journalism. Cooperation among journalists, right? This is answer choice A. That's not far from marking the end of investigative journalism. We'd hope that cooperation would be helpful. And notice answer choice D, this is possibly the worst one, by facilitating cooperation among journalists. So by facilitating cooperation can't mark the end of anything. So in this case, we would have to select answer choice C, the advent of the digital age. That is the thing that's far from marking the end of investigative journalism. Just a quick reminder in example 1 here, we know that this is a dangling modifier question because notice that comma coming before underlined portion 44. Notice the fact that the answer choices are basically saying the same thing, right? Number of potential investigators is in all of the answer choices. Cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens is in all of them as well. So again, similar answer choices. We have an underlined portion coming immediately after the comma, and we have that marking ing up in the question. Let's take a look at another example. Example 2. Let's take a look. Let's evaluate this question first, right? So we have an underlined portion 21. We can see right before 21 on the other side of the, we have that comma we were looking for. We have that ing approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. And our answer choices, as we established in that first example slide that we were going through with those checklist items 1 through 3, we know that we have answer choices that are relatively similar in nature. So we'd have to ask ourselves here, well, who or what is approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money? Well, is the lion's teeth, this is answer choice A, the lion's teeth, are they approaching the doorway? And I guess you could say yes, they are, because they're part of the lion that's approaching. But again, it's not the teeth by themselves. B's looking pretty good, right? The lion's approaching a doorway. The envelope is probably not approaching a doorway. It can't move by itself. And again, D, the teeth of the lion. So our best bet here is answer choice B, because again, who or what is approaching this doorway? The lion is. Let's take a look at another one. Underline portion number 3. Notice the comma before underline portion number 3. Notice the fact that we have an ing in the quite long, actually, clause that comes before underline portion number 3. But we have that ing up at the top. It's 2 lines above the box with the 3 inside of it. By heating, right, ing. And again, we have similar answer choices. Pohl and his team were able to isolate the carbon, resulting chemical reaction isolated the carbon, isolation of carbon was achieved. Or the carbon was isolated in answer choice A. So we have to ask ourselves here, well, okay, who or what is heating the peanuts and the catalyst to 1100 degrees? Well, Pohl and his team were, right? Pohl is a scientist and his team are able to heat this. The carbon is not heating itself. The resulting chemical reaction cannot heat peanuts to a certain temperature. Isolation cannot do this either. That's why answer choice B is best for example 3. All right, let's take a look at one more example before we sign off for the day. Example number 4. We're looking at underline portion 14. Notice immediately before 14 there's a comma. It's a little bit tricky to find because they have that quotation mark up above comedy. But we do have that comma right there coming beforehand. We have similar answer choices. The event inspired Lloyd. Lloyd was inspired. It was Lloyd's inspiration. Its inspiration led Lloyd. And we have that ing coming earlier on, right? Right after that box with the 13 in it, having already made a few films in the vein of thrill comedy. And of course, we then ask ourselves, well, who or what made a few films in the vein of thrill comedy? It wasn't an event that made films. C, it wasn't it. D, it wasn't its inspiration. It was B, Lloyd. Lloyd was the one who made the films. And again, answer choice B is correct here. So thanks everybody for hopping on for today. Really appreciate you going through all these elements with us. And just as a reminder, our online self-paced program, due to the current times and school closures, we've reduced the cost for families. It's a great educational tool, mostly just because you can stay busy with a lot of the information that we've covered over these past 4 days. And hours of additional things that you can hop on and do a little bit at a time. It's normally $199. We're offering it for $99.50 plus tax. Again, it's a 50% off, and you can get that using the offer code FUTURE. Just go to methodtestprep.com/online-SAT-ACT-program. Another reminder, we do have live online classes. These are our ACT power classes. They're starting Saturday, March 21st, so they just started, but you can still hop in right now. The power classes are excellent. You do get a lot of additional instruction that similar to the web-based program, but you're instructor-led, and that's a great thing just to keep the motivation there if that's something you feel you need. Go to methodtestprep.com/classes to access those. And lastly, visit and subscribe to our blog. That's info.methodtestprep.com/blog. And just as a reminder, methodtestprep.com is our website. And if you have any questions about anything, we've been fielding a lot of calls these past couple of weeks, uncertain times, call for certain measures on our end. And we're more than happy to help with any questions you have about upcoming tests or appropriate test prep. So give us a call, 1-877-871-PREP. And thanks again for hopping on. We will see you on tomorrow at 11 a.m. Thanks again.